The wedding dress hung in Violet Anderson's bedroom like a ghost, ivory lace catching the afternoon light that filtered through the curtains of her family's modest house on the outskirts of Enid, Oklahoma. And she should have felt nothing but joy when she looked at it. But instead there was a hollow uncertainty she could not name. It was April 1882, and in 3 days she would marry Thomas Whitmore, the successful merchant who had courted her for 8 months with flowers and pretty words and promises of a comfortable life, far from the struggles her family had endured since moving to the Oklahoma Territory 5 years prior. Her mother told her she was lucky, that a woman of 22 needed to secure her future before opportunity passed her by, and Violet had convinced herself that the absence of passion was simply maturity, that real love was built on stability rather than foolish romantic notions. The settlement of Enid was growing fast in those days, with the railroad bringing new businesses and new people every week, transforming what had been rough frontier land into something resembling civilization. Violet worked in her father's general store, measuring out flour and sugar, listening to the gossip of ranch wives and the boasts of cowboys fresh off the trail. She had known hardship, had watched her father struggle to keep their business afloat through droughts and debt, and Thomas represented security, a way to stop worrying about whether there would be food on the table come winter. She was arranging canned goods on a shelf 2 days before the wedding when the cowboy walked in, dust from the trail still clinging to his worn leather vest, his hat shadowing eyes that held something urgent and troubled. Harrison Drake was his name, though she did not know it yet, and he moved with the easy grace of a man who spent more time in the saddle than on solid ground. He was perhaps 26, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting, and when he removed his hat in deference to her presence, she noticed the firm set of his jaw, the way his gaze swept the store as though searching for something specific. "Can I help you?" Violet asked, smoothing her apron and adopting the pleasant tone she used with all customers. "Looking for Miss Violet Anderson," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. "Would that be you?" Something in his intensity made her pulse quicken. "I am. Do we know each other?" "No, madam, but I need to speak with you about a matter of some urgency. Is there somewhere private we could talk?" Violet glanced toward the back room where her father was doing inventory. "I am afraid that would not be proper. If you have business with me, you can state it here." Harrison shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "It concerns Thomas Whitmore." Her spine stiffened. "My fiancé. What business could you possibly have regarding him? Please, Miss Anderson, what I have to tell you is not something for public ears. I have ridden 3 days straight to get here, because I believe you deserve to know the truth before you make vows you cannot break." The seriousness in his expression frightened her, but she found herself nodding despite her better judgment. "There is a small garden behind the store. We can speak there, but only briefly." She led him through the back door into the patch of struggling vegetables her mother tended, and once they were away from listening ears, Harrison turned to face her with evident reluctance. He held his hat in both hands, working the brim between his fingers. "Miss Anderson, I do not know an easy way to say this, so I will be direct. Thomas Whitmore is not free to marry you. He has a wife already living in Kansas City." The words struck her like a physical blow. "That is impossible. You are mistaken, or you are lying for some purpose I cannot fathom." "I wish I were." Harrison reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn from travel. "This is a copy of their marriage certificate, dated June 1879. Her name is Catherine Whitmore, born Catherine Porter. They have a daughter, 3 years old." Violet's hands trembled as she took the document, but she refused to look at it. "Why would you bring me such lies? If someone put you up to this as some kind of cruel joke. No joke, madam. I met Mrs. Whitmore 6 weeks ago when I was working a ranch outside Kansas City. She was at the general store with her little girl, struggling to pay for basic provisions. The shopkeeper was giving her grief, saying her credit was no good because her husband had left her without means. I helped her with the bill, and we got to talking. She told me about Thomas, about how he had left 2 years back saying he was going to make his fortune in the Oklahoma Territory and send for them. She never heard from him again. Even if this woman exists, how do you know it is the same Thomas Whitmore? Violet's voice shook with anger and fear in equal measure. She showed me a photograph. I recognized him immediately because I had seen him here in Enid just a few weeks before, when I was passing through on a cattle drive. I saw him escorting a pretty blonde woman, very respectable looking. The shopkeeper told me he was a successful merchant, engaged to be married. When Mrs. Whitmore described her husband and I realized it was the same man, I knew I had to come warn his intended bride. Why? Violet demanded, her eyes burning. Why would you ride 3 days for a stranger? What is your interest in any of this? Harrison met her gaze steadily. Because my own mother was deceived by a man who hid his true nature until after the wedding. She spent 20 years in misery before he finally drank himself to death. I swore then that if I ever had the power to spare another woman such a fate, I would do it, no matter the cost to myself. There was such plain honesty in his face that Violet felt her certainty wavering. Thomas has been nothing but kind to me. He has courted me honorably, introduced me to his business associates, been welcomed by my family. How could he maintain such a deception? Men like that are skilled liars, Miss Anderson. It is how they survive. Harrison's expression was grim. I have more than just the certificate. Catherine gave me letters in Thomas's own hand, and the photograph I mentioned. I did not bring them because I did not want to carry more than was necessary on the trail, but they exist. More than that, she told me details about him that I confirmed here in Enid. He has a scar on his left shoulder from a childhood accident with a horse. He is missing half his little toe on his right foot from frostbite. His mother's name was Margaret, and she died when he was 14. Each detail struck home because Violet knew them to be true. Thomas had told her about his mother's death, had explained the scar when they had gone swimming at the creek with a church group. She had never seen his feet unshod, but he had mentioned the frostbite in passing. "I need to think," she whispered, the paper crumpling in her grip. "This is 2 days before my wedding. My family has spent money we do not have on the celebration. The whole town knows, if I call it off on the word of a stranger." "I know what I am asking of you," Harrison said quietly. "But would you rather have the shame now, or discover the truth after you have bound yourself to him legally and morally? What happens when his wife comes looking for him, or when he tires of playing the respectable merchant and disappears one night, leaving you to explain to everyone why your husband abandoned you?" Violet's mind raced, trying to find some flaw in his story, some reason to dismiss it entirely. If you are telling the truth, why would he risk such a thing? He must know his wife could find him. Men like Thomas count on the distances of the frontier to hide their sins. Kansas City to Enid is not a journey most people make lightly. He likely thought Catherine would never have the means or the knowledge to track him. He probably thought he was safe. Harrison stepped closer, his voice urgent but gentle. "Miss Anderson, I am not asking you to take my word alone. Confront him with this information. Watch his face when you tell him you know about Catherine and their daughter. A guilty man cannot hide that first flash of panic. And if you are wrong, if this is all some terrible mistake, then he will have a reasonable explanation, and you will go forward with your wedding with a clear conscience." But if I am right, you will have saved yourself from a fate worse than spinsterhood." Violet finally looked down at the marriage certificate in her hands, forcing herself to read the words. Thomas Michael Whitmore and Catherine Rose Porter, married in Kansas City, Missouri, witnessed and signed by a judge whose name was clearly legible. The date made her stomach turn because it meant Thomas had been married for nearly 3 years, his daughter already born by the time he began courting Violet. "What is she like?" Violet asked quietly. "His wife." Harrison's expression softened. "Tired, worried. She works washing laundry to feed herself and the child. She still wears her wedding ring, still believes her husband meant to come back for her. She has no idea he is about to commit bigamy with another woman." The image of this unknown woman, struggling alone while Thomas courted Violet with flowers and false promises, ignited something fierce in her chest. If this was true, then she was not merely a victim of deception but an unwitting participant in another woman's betrayal. "I will speak with Thomas tonight," Violet said, her voice steadier now. "He is coming for dinner with my family. I will find a moment alone with him and present what you have told me. I can be nearby in case you need someone to corroborate the story." "No." Violet shook her head firmly. "If I am to do this, I must do it myself, but I need to know where to find you afterward in case." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "I will take a room at the boarding house on 2nd Street, Mrs. Halloran's place. You can send word there." Harrison replaced his hat, his eyes searching her face with an expression that held both concern and something else, something warmer that made her acutely aware of him as a man rather than merely a messenger of ill tidings. "I know this is hard, Miss Anderson. You have my word that I would not have come if I were not certain of the truth." After he left, Violet stood in the garden for a long time, watching the sun sink lower in the sky and wondering how her entire world could tilt on its axis in the span of a single conversation. She thought about Thomas's kisses, always chaste and brief, his reluctance to discuss his past in detail, the way he had pushed for a quick engagement and faster wedding. She had attributed it to passion, to a man eager to begin his married life, but now each memory took on a sinister new dimension. That evening, Thomas arrived precisely at 6, as he always did, bearing a bottle of wine and wearing his best suit. He was handsome in a polished way, with carefully groomed blonde hair and the soft hands of a man who worked with ledgers rather than cattle. He charmed her mother with compliments about the roast chicken, discussed business with her father, and played the role of the perfect son-in-law with practiced ease. Violet watched him through dinner, searching for cracks in the facade, trying to reconcile this familiar man with the picture Harrison had painted of a liar and a bigamist. When the meal ended and her mother began clearing plates, Violet touched Thomas's arm. "Will you take a walk with me? I would like to see the sunset before it fades entirely." "Of course, my dear." His smile was warm, indulgent, though we should not be long, propriety and all that. They walked toward the edge of town where the prairie opened up endless and amber in the dying light, and Violet forced herself to speak before her courage failed. "Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. You know you can ask me anything." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Is there anything about your past that I should know before we marry? Any previous entanglements or obligations that might affect our future together?" His smile did not waver, but something flickered in his eyes, gone too quickly to name. "What a strange question, Violet. Has someone been telling you stories? Please just answer." "I have nothing to hide from you. My life before I came to Enid was unremarkable. I worked various positions in Kansas City, saved my money, and came here seeking better opportunities. I met you, fell in love, and now we are about to begin our life together. That is the whole of it." She pulled the folded marriage certificate from her pocket and held it out to him. "Then how do you explain this?" The change in his face was instantaneous and damning. The color drained from his cheeks, his eyes widened with genuine panic, and his mouth opened and closed soundlessly before he recovered enough to snatch the paper from her hand. "Where did you get this?" His voice had lost all its smoothness, turned sharp and dangerous. "That hardly matters." "Is it real, Thomas? Are you already married?" He stared at the certificate, and she watched him weigh his options, calculate which lie might still salvage the situation. When he finally looked up, his expression had hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. "Catherine is not part of my life anymore. That marriage was a mistake, a youthful folly. I left because she was a shrew who made my existence miserable. What we have, Violet, is real. This is just paper from a past that has no bearing on our future." "You have a child," Violet said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to remain composed. "A daughter you abandoned, one I never wanted." The casual cruelty in his tone made her recoil. "Catherine trapped me with a pregnancy, and I was fool enough to marry her for it. But I will not let one mistake ruin my entire life. You and I can still marry, Violet. We can go somewhere else, somewhere this does not matter." "Somewhere else? Thomas, you are proposing bigamy. That is not merely improper, it is illegal and immoral." His hand shot out and gripped her arm, hard enough to bruise. "You will not ruin this for me. I have worked too hard to build my reputation here, to create this life. If you expose me, you will suffer as much as I will. Everyone will know you were fool enough to almost marry a taken man. Your family will be humiliated." Fear spiked through her, sharp and electric, because this was a Thomas she had never seen, all pretense stripped away to reveal the calculating predator beneath. She tried to pull free, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me." "Not until you agree to keep silent about this. We will call off the wedding quietly, tell everyone we decided we were not suited. You will return my ring and whatever gifts I have given you, and we will part as friends. In exchange, I will leave Enid and your reputation will remain intact." "And Catherine, what about your actual wife and child? That is no concern of yours." His eyes were flat, emotionless. "Do we have an agreement?" Before Violet could respond, a figure emerged from the gathering darkness, moving fast and purposeful. Harrison Drake's voice cut through the twilight like a blade. "The lady asked you to let go." Thomas released her arm immediately, stepping back with his hands raised in a gesture of false innocence. "This is a private conversation between my fiancé and myself. You are not welcome here. I think Miss Anderson decides who is welcome in her company, not you." Harrison positioned himself between them, and though he made no threatening gesture, his stance communicated a clear warning. "And from where I stood, it looked like you were handling her roughly." "A misunderstanding," Thomas said smoothly, his mask sliding back into place. "Emotions are running high due to some false accusations made against my character. I assume you are the one who brought her that ridiculous document, not false. True. Your wife sends her regards, by the way. I told Catherine I would check on her husband and report back on his circumstances." Harrison's tone was conversational, but his eyes never left Thomas. "Should I tell her you are doing well, that you were about to commit a crime while she and your daughter survive on laundry wages?" Thomas's facade cracked again, fury twisting his features. "You have made a serious enemy today, Cowboy. I have friends in this town, influence. You will regret interfering in matters that do not concern you. The only thing I regret is not getting here sooner." Harrison turned slightly to address Violet without taking his attention fully off Thomas. "Miss Anderson, would you like me to escort you home?" "Yes, she managed, her voice small and shaken. "Please." They walked back toward town together, leaving Thomas standing alone in the darkening prairie, and Violet felt the adrenaline shaking through her limbs, making her steps unsteady. Harrison offered his arm, and she took it gratefully, needing the support. "How long were you following us?" she asked. "Since you left your house. I did not trust him not to become dangerous when confronted, and I wanted to be close enough to help if needed. I apologize if that seems presumptuous. You were right to worry." Violet touched her arm where Thomas had grabbed her, feeling the tender spots that would become bruises. "I did not know him at all, did I? I thought I was marrying a good man." "You saw what he wanted you to see. That is not a failing on your part." When they reached her house, her parents were sitting on the porch enjoying the evening air, and her mother's face brightened at the sight of them before confusion set in at Violet's distressed expression and the absence of Thomas. "Violet, what has happened? Where is Thomas?" The next hours were some of the hardest of Violet's life, explaining everything to her stunned parents, showing them the marriage certificate, watching their joy for her future crumble into shock and anger. Her father wanted to confront Thomas immediately, to demand recompense for the money spent on the wedding, but Harrison counseled caution. "Men like Whitmore are unpredictable when cornered," he said, sitting in their modest parlor with his hat on his knee, looking too large and vital for the delicate furniture. "He has already proven himself willing to lie and deceive on a grand scale. It is better to handle this through proper channels. I can wire the marshal in Kansas City, have him confirm the marriage and Catherine's situation. With legal proof, you can force Thomas to leave town or face prosecution for attempted bigamy." "But the wedding," Violet's mother said weakly. "We have food ordered, guests invited, the church reserved." "Better to cancel a wedding than live a lie," her father said grimly. "Violet, you will go to the church first thing tomorrow and inform Reverend Matthews. I will handle the other arrangements. As for you, Mr. Drake, it seems we owe you a debt we can never properly repay." "No debt, sir. I only did what any decent man would do." But that was not entirely true, and Violet sensed it in the way Harrison's eyes sought hers across the room, in the careful way he spoke to her, as though she were something precious that might break. He had ridden 3 days on the word of a stranger, had involved himself in a messy situation that could easily have turned violent, had appointed himself her protector without being asked. There was something more driving him than mere general decency, something specific and focused in his attention. Over the next 2 days, Enid buzzed with gossip as news of the canceled wedding spread. Violet endured the pitying looks and whispered speculation with as much dignity as she could muster, and through it all, Harrison remained a steady presence. He sent the wire to Kansas City and received confirmation of Thomas's legal marriage. He accompanied Violet's father to confront Thomas at his mercantile, standing silent and intimidating while her father demanded the man leave town immediately or face legal consequences. Thomas left within 24 hours, closing his business abruptly and disappearing in the night like the coward he was. And while Violet knew she should feel vindicated, mostly she felt exhausted and foolish. She had been so certain of her path, so sure that Thomas represented security and a good future, and discovering how thoroughly she had misjudged him shook her confidence in her own judgment. Harrison found her sitting alone in the store 3 days after the canceled wedding, staring blankly at the same shelf of canned goods she had been organizing when he first walked into her life. "I will be heading back out soon," he said quietly. "I wanted to check on you before I left." The thought of him leaving sent an unexpected pang through her chest. Back to Kansas City, to tell Catherine what happened. Yes, She deserves to know her husband's location and circumstances, though I expect the information will bring her little comfort." He leaned against the counter, studying her with those perceptive eyes. "How are you managing? Everyone treats me like I am made of glass, likely to shatter at any moment. They either pity me for being deceived or wonder if I somehow knew and chose to ignore it. Either way, I have become an object of speculation rather than a person. That will fade. Something else will capture their attention soon enough. Will it?" Violet turned to face him fully. "Or will I forever be the woman who almost married a bigamist? The poor fool who could not recognize a liar when he courted her. You are the woman who had the courage to face the truth and walk away from a comfortable lie," Harrison corrected gently. "That takes more strength than most people have. I did not have a choice once you brought me proof." "You always had a choice. You could have dismissed me as a troublemaker and married Thomas anyway, preferring ignorance to scandal. Many would have." He pushed away from the counter, moving closer. "Instead, you confronted him, stood up to him when he became threatening, and made the hard decision to protect yourself and his actual wife from further harm. That is not weakness, Miss Anderson. That is courage." She felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since the night of the confrontation. "Why did you really come all this way, Mr. Drake? Please tell me the truth." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hands before rising to meet hers again. "Because when I saw Thomas with you that day in town, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And then, when Catherine told me her story and I realized you were about to marry a man who would destroy your life as thoroughly as my father destroyed my mother's, I could not stand by and let it happen, even if it meant you would hate me for bringing you such news. I do not hate you." The words came out whisper soft. "I do not know what I feel, to be honest. Everything is confused and turned upside down. That is understandable. You have been through a terrible ordeal." Harrison reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her hand where it rested on the counter. "I know the timing is poor, and I have no right to ask anything of you when your life has just been upended. But I need you to know that I did not do this solely from altruism. I did it because the thought of you belonging to another man, especially one so unworthy, was unbearable to me." Her breath caught at the intensity in his voice, at the frank admission in his eyes. "You do not know me. I know you are kind because you spoke to a dusty cowboy with the same courtesy you would give a wealthy customer. I know you are brave because you faced Thomas's deception head-on rather than hiding from it. I know you are loyal because your first thought was for his actual wife and daughter, not just your own situation. That is enough for me to want to know more, Mr. Drake." "Harrison," he interrupted gently. "Please call me Harrison, Harrison." The name felt strange and intimate on her tongue. "What are you asking of me?" "Nothing right now. You need time to recover from this betrayal to find your footing again. But I am asking for permission to write to you if you would accept letters from me. And perhaps, in a few months when the dust has settled, I could return to Enid and call on you properly, if you would allow it." The careful hopefulness in his expression touched something deep in her chest, and for the first time since her world fell apart, Violet felt a flutter of something that was not quite hope, but was certainly not despair. "I would accept letters," she said slowly. "Though I make no promises about anything else. My judgment has proven questionable." "Your judgment was sound. Thomas was simply skilled at deception, but I am not Thomas, and I swear to you that I will never lie to you or hide my true nature. If you decide you have no interest in me, I will accept that and trouble you no further. But at least give me a chance to show you who I really am." She studied his face, searching for any sign of the duplicity that Thomas had hidden so well, but all she saw was earnest sincerity and a vulnerability that suggested her answer mattered more to him than he wanted to admit. "All right," she agreed. "Write to me. Tell me about yourself, about your work, about the places you go, and I will write back when I am ready." The smile that transformed his face made her pulse quicken in a way Thomas's practiced charm never had, genuine and warm and entirely unguarded. "Thank you, Violet. May I call you Violet?" "Yes," she found herself smiling back despite everything. "I think you have earned that right." Harrison left the next day with promises to write soon and an expression that suggested he was carrying something precious with him on the trail. Violet watched him ride out from the porch of the store, and her mother came to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "That is a good man," her mother said quietly. "Nothing like Thomas. I know. That is what frightens me." Violet leaned into her mother's embrace. "What if I am wrong again? Then you will survive it, as you have survived this. But I do not think you are wrong about him. A man who rides 3 days to protect a stranger and expects nothing in return is rare in any age." The first letter arrived 2 weeks later, travel-stained and thick with pages, and Violet carried it to her room before opening it with trembling hands. Harrison's handwriting was surprisingly neat for a cowboy, and his words were thoughtful and detailed, painting pictures of his life on the trail, the work he did moving cattle from Texas to Kansas rail heads, the beauty of sleeping under stars so thick they looked like spilled milk across the black sky. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, how his father's drinking and violence had made their home a place of fear rather than safety, how his mother had withstood it with quiet dignity until her death when Harrison was 18 had finally freed her. He wrote about how he had left home immediately after her funeral, unable to spend another night in the house that held so many painful memories, and how he had found a kind of peace in the hard work and honest camaraderie of cowboy life. But mostly he wrote about her, asking questions about her interests and dreams, remembering small details from their brief conversations and asking her to elaborate on them. He wanted to know what books she read, what she thought about when she looked at the prairie sunset, whether she had always lived in Oklahoma or had memories of somewhere else. Violet read the letter 3 times before she could bring herself to respond, but when she finally put pen to paper, the words flowed more easily than she expected. She told him about growing up in Missouri herself before her family moved west when she was 17, about the adventure and terror of crossing into Indian territory when it was still wild and largely unsettled, about learning to run the store and becoming her father's right hand when his health began to fail. She wrote about her love of reading, how she devoured every book that passed through the store, fiction and history and poetry alike. She described the particular quality of light in Oklahoma that was different from Missouri, harsher and more honest somehow. And she admitted, in careful words, that she was grateful to him not just for exposing Thomas's deception, but for doing it with kindness rather than judgment. Thus began a correspondence that stretched across the summer months of 1882, letters crossing the plains between Enid and wherever Harrison happened to be working. He wrote from dusty cattle towns and remote ranches, his letters arriving irregularly but always eagerly anticipated. Violet found herself checking the post with increasing frequency, her heart lifting whenever she recognized his handwriting on an envelope. Through their letters, she learned about his love of horses and his skill with them, how he could gentle even the most fractious animal with patience and understanding. She learned about his sense of humor, dry and unexpected, and his tendency towards self-deprecation that suggested a man more comfortable praising others than himself. She learned about his dreams of someday owning a small ranch where he could raise quality horses. Nothing grand, but something stable and his own. And slowly, carefully, she learned to trust again. Not just Harrison, but her own instincts. Because this felt different from anything she had experienced with Thomas. Less about external markers of success, and more about genuine connection. Understanding. The sense of being truly seen by another person. In August, Harrison wrote that he would be bringing a herd through near Enid in September, and asked permission to stop and visit for a few days if she was willing. Violet carried that letter with her for 2 days before showing it to her parents, and her father's knowing smile told her that he had been watching her growing attachment with approval. "Invite him to dinner," he said. "Let us get to know this young man who has captured my daughter's attention." September arrived with cooler weather and brilliant blue skies, and Violet found herself nervous in a way she had not been before Thomas. A fluttery anticipation that was equal parts excitement and fear. She changed her dress 3 times on the day Harrison was expected to arrive, until her mother laughed and told her she looked beautiful in all of them, and to please choose one before she wore a path in the floorboards. She was wearing pale blue cotton when she saw him ride up to the store, and the smile on his face when he dismounted and removed his hat made all the anxiety dissolve into pure joy. He looked thinner from months on the trail, his skin even more sun-weathered, but his eyes held the same warmth and intelligence that had drawn her to his letters. "Miss Anderson," he said formally, though his eyes danced with humor at the formality. "It is good to see you again, Mr. Drake. Welcome back to Enid." She could not quite suppress her smile. How was the drive? Long and dusty, and entirely worth it to be standing here right now. He glanced toward the store where she knew her mother was watching from the window. "I hope I am not being presumptuous by arriving a day early." "We made better time than expected." "Not at all. My parents are expecting you for dinner this evening if you are not too tired from travel." "I could ride another 100 miles and not be too tired to see you," he said quietly, and the plain sincerity of it made her breath catch. That evening over her mother's pot roast, Harrison charmed her parents with stories from the trail and demonstrated the thoughtfulness she had come to know from his letters. He asked her father about the store business with genuine interest, discussed the growing tension between settlers and cattlemen with nuance and understanding, and treated her mother with a respect that had her blushing and laughing like a girl. But it was after dinner, when they walked together in the garden as the sun set, that Violet felt the full weight of how much had changed since that day in April. "I have missed you," Harrison said, the words simple but weighted with meaning. "Your letters have been the best part of my days, but reading your words is not the same as being in your presence." "I have missed you too," Violet admitted. "More than I expected to, if I am being honest." "Can I ask you something?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "The last few months, writing to you and thinking about you, have been the happiest I have known in a long time. I know it has not been very long, and I know you have reason to be cautious after what Thomas did. But I need to know if you feel even a fraction of what I feel for you, because if you do, I would very much like to court you properly." Violet's heart hammered against her ribs. "What about your work? You are on the trail most of the year." "I have saved money, enough to make a start on that ranch I told you about. There is land available for claim not far from here, good grazing land with a creek running through it. I spoke to the land office in town today, and I can file a claim whenever I am ready." He reached for her hands, his calloused palms warm against hers. "I am ready to stop wandering, Violet. I am ready to build something permanent, something real, but only if you want to build it with me." She should have said it was too soon, that she needed more time, that the sensible thing was to slow down and be careful. Instead, she found herself squeezing his hands and saying, "Yes, I feel it too, whatever this is between us. And yes, you may court me properly." The joy that lit his face was like sunrise, and when he pulled her gently into his arms, she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady thunder of his heart. This was not the tepid affection she had mistaken for love with Thomas, but something fierce and sure and entirely mutual, the feeling of coming home after a long journey. "I will do this right," Harrison murmured against her hair. "I will court you the way you deserve, take my time, let you be absolutely certain of me before I ask anything more. I want you to have no doubts." "I already have no doubts," Violet said, pulling back enough to look up at him. "But I appreciate your patience nonetheless." He courted her through the fall with a focus and dedication that made even the most skeptical townspeople soften toward him. He filed his land claim and began the hard work of building a small cabin on the property, often working from dawn until dark, while still finding time to call on Violet almost every evening. He attended church with her family, helped her father with heavy work around the store, and gradually became woven into the fabric of her daily life in a way that felt natural and right. Unlike Thomas, who had always maintained a certain polish and distance, Harrison was entirely present and genuine in everything he did. He did not bring her expensive gifts but wildflowers picked from the prairie, did not make grand pronouncements but showed his feelings through steady attention and care. He listened when she spoke, remembered details, asked her opinion on everything from where to position the windows in his cabin to what breed of horses he should focus on breeding. In December, when the first snow dusted the Oklahoma plains and made the world look clean and new, Harrison took her to see the completed cabin. It was small but well built, with a stone fireplace he had labored over for weeks and windows positioned to catch the morning light. He had made furniture himself, rough but sturdy, and when Violet walked through the door, she could picture herself living there with a clarity that was almost painful in its intensity. "It is not much," Harrison said, watching her anxiously. "But it is solid and warm, and I built it thinking of you in every room, imagining you here with me." "It is perfect," Violet said honestly, turning to face him. "You built this for us, for you primarily. I wanted you to see that I could provide for you, that I am serious about building a life here." He crossed the room to stand in front of her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Violet, I know it has only been a few months since I came back to Enid, but I have loved you since the first moment I saw you in your father's store, maybe even before that, when Catherine first described Thomas's other life, and I felt such fury at the thought of you being hurt. Every day since has only made me more certain that you are the woman I want to spend my life with." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but beautiful. "I cannot offer you the wealth Thomas pretended to have, but I can offer you honesty and fidelity and a love that will never waver. Will you marry me, Violet? Will you take a chance on a cowboy who wants nothing more than to spend the rest of his life making you happy?" Tears blurred her vision as she looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the cabin he had built with his own hands while dreaming of their future. 6 months ago, she had been about to marry a man who would have destroyed her life with his lies. Now she stood before a man who had saved her from that fate and offered her something infinitely better, real and true and entirely her own. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Harrison, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands and then pulled her into a kiss that was nothing like Thomas's calculated pecks, but full of passion and promise and barely restrained longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend every day of my life being worthy of this," he promised. "Worthy of you. You already are," Violet assured him. "You have been from the beginning." They married in February 1883, almost a year after Harrison first walked into her father's store with his devastating news. The wedding was small and simple, held in the same church where Violet had been supposed to marry Thomas. And if anyone thought it inappropriate or too soon, they kept their opinions to themselves. Violet wore a new dress, cream-colored rather than white, and carried a bouquet of early wildflowers that Harrison had ridden miles to find. Her father walked her down the aisle with pride shining in his eyes, and when she reached the front of the church where Harrison waited in his best suit, looking nervous and awed and entirely devoted, she felt a certainty that had been absent the first time she had planned this walk. The Reverend spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through hardship and joy, and when Harrison repeated his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers. When it came time for her vows, Violet spoke from her heart rather than simply repeating the Reverend's words. "I promise to love you truthfully and completely, to build a home with you that is filled with honesty and trust, to stand beside you through whatever comes. You saved me from a terrible mistake, and I will spend my life being grateful for your courage and kindness." There were tears on more than one face in the small congregation, and when the Reverend finally pronounced them married and Harrison kissed her with tender intensity, Violet felt as though everything had finally clicked into place, all the scattered pieces of her life forming a picture that made sense. The wedding breakfast was held at her parents' house, a cheerful gathering of friends and family who had watched their courtship with approval and were genuinely happy to celebrate their union. Catherine Whitmore had sent a letter of congratulation and thanks, having received the money Harrison had quietly sent her to help with expenses, and though Violet had never met the woman, she felt a strange kinship with her, two women who had escaped the same predator. Thomas himself had not been heard from since leaving Enid, and Violet did not waste thoughts wondering where he had gone or what lies he was currently telling. That chapter of her life was closed, superseded by something infinitely better. Harrison carried her over the threshold of their cabin as the sun set, and Violet laughed at the theatricality of it until he kissed her breathless and carried her to the bedroom he had furnished with such care. Their wedding night was tender and passionate and entirely theirs, free from the shadow of deception or the weight of unfulfilled promises. In the years that followed, they built a life that was simple but deeply satisfying, filled with hard work and genuine companionship, and a love that grew stronger with each passing season. Harrison proved to have an extraordinary gift for breeding and training horses, and their small ranch gained a reputation for quality that brought buyers from across the territory. Violet managed the business side with the same skill she had brought to her father's store, and together they prospered in ways that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with mutual respect and shared purpose. Their first child, a son they named Henry after Harrison's grandfather, was born in early 1884, arriving during a late winter snowstorm that had Harrison pacing the cabin like a caged animal, until the midwife finally presented him with a red-faced, squalling infant. Watching Harrison hold their son for the first time, his large hands cradling the tiny body with infinite gentleness, Violet felt her heart expand with a love she had not known was possible. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, smaller and quieter than her brother, with Violet's blonde hair and Harrison's intense dark eyes. They named her Margaret after Harrison's mother, And though he cried when he held her for the first time, they were tears of joy rather than grief, a sense that he was giving his mother's name to something beautiful rather than leaving it associated only with pain. Violet's parents remained close, her father eventually selling the store and retiring to a small house Harrison built for them on the edge of the ranch property, where they could watch their grandchildren grow and enjoy the fruits of their years of hard work. Violet often thought about how differently things could have turned out, how close she had come to a life of deception and eventual heartbreak. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching Henry chase chickens while baby Margaret slept in Violet's arms, Harrison reached for her free hand and squeezed gently. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying a cowboy instead of a prosperous merchant." "Thomas was never a prosperous merchant," Violet reminded him. "He was a liar playing a role. You are a successful rancher, a devoted husband, and a wonderful father. There is nothing to regret. I just want to make sure you are happy. That this life is enough for you." She turned to look at him fully. This man who had ridden into her life at precisely the right moment to save her from a terrible mistake, who had courted her with patience and married her with devotion, and loved her with a constancy that never wavered. "This life is everything," she said firmly. "You are everything. I did not know what real love was until you showed me, and I thank God every day that you had the courage to tell me the truth, even knowing I might hate you for it. I could never have lived with myself if I had let you marry him." Harrison lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with gentle reverence. "From the moment I saw you, you were mine to protect, even if you did not know it yet. I know it now." Violet leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and prairie wind that always clung to him. "I know it, and I choose it, every single day." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Violet reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. She had been engaged to a liar, had planned a wedding built on deception, and had been rescued by a cowboy who asked nothing in return but the chance to prove his worth. That rescue had transformed into courtship, that courtship into marriage, and that marriage into a partnership that was everything she had not known she needed. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and small joys, watching their children grow strong and healthy, adding 2 more sons to their family, expanding the ranch until it was one of the most successful in the territory. Harrison's reputation as a horseman spread far enough that people traveled significant distances to buy from him, and Violet's business acumen ensured they invested wisely and weathered the economic uncertainties that plagued many of their neighbors. But more than external success, their marriage remained a source of strength and happiness for both of them, the kind of partnership where they could communicate without words and support each other through difficulties without resentment. They still took walks in the evenings when weather permitted, still found time to sit together after the children were asleep and talk about everything and nothing, still looked at each other across crowded rooms and felt that flutter of recognition and desire that had marked their courtship. On their 10th anniversary, Harrison took her back to the spot where he had proposed, the cabin that had since been expanded and improved, but still held the bones of what he had built with his own hands while dreaming of their future. 10 years, he marveled, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they stood looking out at the land they had cultivated together. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I walked into your father's store, scared to death that you would refuse to listen to me. Other times it feels like you have been mine forever, like I cannot remember a time when I did not love you." "Both things can be true," Violet said, leaning back into his embrace. "Every day with you feels new and familiar at the same time." like coming home to a place I have always known, but somehow never tire of discovering. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible, Harrison murmured against her hair. Everything good in my life traces back to you. Everything good in mine traces back to your courage that day, Violet countered. You could have ignored Catherine's story, could have decided it was not your problem. Instead, you rode 3 days to protect a stranger, and that choice changed both our lives. Best decision I ever made. He turned her in his arms so they were face to face. I love you, Violet Drake. More today than yesterday, less than I will tomorrow. She kissed him then, pouring a decade of gratitude and love and partnership into the embrace. And when they finally pulled apart, both were smiling with the easy contentment of two people who knew themselves completely understood and cherished. Their children grew into capable, thoughtful adults who inherited the best qualities of both parents: Henry's steadiness and sense of responsibility, Margaret's quick intelligence and compassion, the younger boy's humor and adventurous spirits. Violet and Harrison became grandparents in their later years, delighting in the chaos and joy that grandchildren brought, spoiling them with the privilege of elders who could return the children to their parents when they grew too rambunctious. As they aged, their love only deepened, becoming less about passion and more about profound companionship. The comfort of facing life's challenges beside someone who knew you completely and loved you anyway. They had arguments occasionally, disagreements about how to handle various situations, but they had learned long ago to talk through problems rather than letting resentment fester, to apologize when wrong and forgive quickly. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the home they had built together, Harrison stood to give a toast, his hair now streaked with gray but his eyes still sharp and warm when they found Violet across the table. 30 years ago, he began, his voice carrying easily through the room, I made the most important decision of my life. I chose to ride to Enid to warn a woman I did not know about a man who did not deserve her. I did it thinking I was saving her from heartbreak, but what I did not realize was that I was saving myself as well. Violet, you took a chance on a wandering cowboy with more dreams than prospects, and you have spent 3 decades making those dreams reality. You have given me children I adore, a home I cherish, and a love I never dared hope for. I would ride those 3 days 1,000 times over for even 1 year of what we have built together. There was not a dry eye at the table by the time he finished, and Violet rose to embrace him, feeling the solid strength of him still there despite the years, the same man who had walked into her father's store and changed her life forever. You saved me, she whispered against his chest. And then you loved me. I could not ask for anything more. They had many more years together after that, watching their family continue to grow and flourish, seeing Oklahoma Territory become a state, witnessing the turn of a century and the slow modernization of the world around them. Through it all, they remained each other's constants, the love that had begun with an act of courage and grown into something unshakable and eternal. When Harrison finally passed in his sleep at the age of 78, Violet held his hand and thanked him one last time for that day in April 1882, when he had walked into her life and refused to let her make the biggest mistake of her existence. She missed him with an ache that never fully faded, but she did not regret a single day they had shared, not a single moment of the life they had built together. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her in her final years, and she told them the story often, wanting them to understand the importance of courage and honesty, of speaking truth even when it was difficult, of recognizing real love when it appeared and having the wisdom to choose it over comfortable lies. When Violet Anderson Drake passed peacefully in her sleep at age 82, Surrounded by 3 generations of family in the home she and Harrison had made, her last thoughts were of a dusty cowboy walking into a general store, of dark eyes meeting hers with purpose and concern, of a love that had been worth every moment of faith and trust she had invested in it. Their grandchildren would tell the story for decades after, the tale of how their grandfather had saved their grandmother from a bigamist and won her heart in the process. And it became part of family legend, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with an act of courage, a willingness to do what is right regardless of personal cost, and the recognition that true love is built not on pretty lies but on difficult truths faced together. The ranch they had built continued for generations, the land they had claimed and cultivated remaining in family hands, a testament to what 2 people could create when they built their foundation on honesty and mutual respect, and a love that refused to be diminished by time or circumstance. And somewhere in the Oklahoma prairie, where wildflowers still bloomed each spring, and the wind still carried the scent of distant places, the memory of Violet and Harrison endured, a love story that proved sometimes the greatest romances begin with someone brave enough to tell the truth.